And welcome back to a brand new edition of Dark Matters Radio. My name is Don Ecker. I will be your host, and tonight we're taking another one of those blasts into the past. On November the 22nd, 1992, which incidentally was also the anniversary date of the death of President John F. Kennedy, on my original radio program, UFOs Tonight, which that particular time was a Sunday evening, I hosted UFOs Tonight, and my guest was Mr. George Knapp. Now, I'm sure everybody that tunes into this program will know who George Knapp is. He's an award-winning television journalist from KLAS Television, Channel 8 in Las Vegas, Nevada. George has had a long history in exploring esoteric phenomena, i.e., read that, UFOs and other facets like cattle mutilations. And over the years, George has broken some huge stories. For example, George was the guy that brought us the Bob Lazar story, starting back in 1988 when Lazar appeared on George's television program in Electronic Blackout, and a year later when Lazar went public. Now, I've known George since that very time, since about 1989. And how many of you are aware that George, for a while, left KLAS TV and began his own production company? He did a series of documentaries called UFOs, The Best Evidence. Incidentally, at that time, I was one of the people that George interviewed. Now, on this particular show, we're talking about that. We're talking about George's contributions to the UFO subject and what brought him into the fold. Now, without a lot of further ado, let's start this little excursion into George Knapp's Best Evidence.
And welcome once again to another edition of UFOs Tonight. Hello, my name is Don Ecker, and I'm the Director of Research for UFO Magazine, which incidentally happens to be the world's most journalistic and ethical publication on one of the world's most misunderstood phenomenon, UFOs. And if you've been tuning in for just about the last year, you know that each week at this time, Sunday evenings, we do a show with a fascinating and informed guest on one of the world's most misunderstood phenomenon. Now, you might be asking yourselves, just out of curiosity, why we're doing UFOs tonight. Well, the UFO phenomenon has been around for a long time and is an extraordinarily misunderstood and misrepresented enigma. While many other TV and radio programs have sought to exploit the public's interest in this phenomenon, we here at UFOs Tonight are going to do what no other show has ever done before, and that's totally explore, investigate, and probe just what is occurring. And tonight we have a special guest that's going to help us do exactly that. Spending 10 years as an anchorman and investigative reporter on Las Vegas's KLAS television, and hosting his own talk show, television talk show, On the Record, Mr. George Knapp in 1989 broke probably one of the biggest stories that had been broken in years on the UFO phenomenon, and that was the story on Bob Lazar. And joining us tonight on UFOs Tonight from Las Vegas is George. Good evening, George.
Hi, Don. You know how much respect I have for you and Vicky and UFO Magazine, the work you're doing, so yeah, I welcome the chance to talk to you and your listeners.
Well, we sure appreciate it. George, you've been involved in this crazy field now off and on since 1989. Prior to encountering the Bob Lazar story, which incidentally just a couple of weeks ago we had Gene Huff on here as a guest. It was up to this point one of our most listened to and and appreciated programs. Did you have an interest in this subject, or have you ever encountered it prior to that?
It was prior to 1989. I mean, I think before that, I had the same kind of interest that any reasonable thinking, open-minded person would have. You know, you figure it's an interesting topic, but it's not an obsession. Stories about Area 51, of course, in the news business in Las Vegas had been floating around for a long time, not necessarily associated with flying saucers, but about a whole variety of black projects. The U-2 spy plane we knew was based out there, the SR-71, particle beam weapons testing programs, the commandos that made the ill-fated raid on Iran to rescue the hostages during the Carter years were trained there. A lot of strange stuff has gone on. My news director at KLAS, Bob Stodahl, had a fascination with the area. My managing editor, a guy named Ned Day, had also had a fascination with the area and actually broke the story about stealth technology being developed there. He did that with the help of a guy named John Lear, who is probably known to your audience, an aviator and now a UFO researcher who became an important source for him. In 1987, John Lear came cruising into the TV station with the MJ-12 documents and another pile of other UFO material trying to interest my bosses in the UFO story. They weren't buying it. They thought that basically people would laugh him out of the room. I overheard part of the conversation, and I said to Lear before he left, hey, let me take a look at that stuff. And I found it to be intriguing and fascinating. I put Lear on this talk show that I produced at the time called On the Record, and just basically let him go. John is a controversial figure in UFO circles. A lot of people think that some of the stuff that he says is not supported, but it was very interesting. It seemed to touch a nerve with the audience because this little public affairs show got the best ratings, the best public response it ever had.
Well, George, that's not the only program that you've hosted that garnered supremely high ratings, not to mention probably one of the most bootlegged series of television shows ever, which were your news reports when you broke the Lazar story.
Don, I am very impressed by whoever is running the underground UFO videotape distribution system because it's amazing how far this thing has gone. KLAS TV has never formally distributed the tape, although it seems like, it's been 3 years ago this week since we started the series, and since we did that first series, and I get calls almost every day from Australia and Ireland and Germany and England and just about every state in the Union. You can almost tell when the bootleg copy hits a new area because all of a sudden you'll get five phone calls from Minnesota.
Well, you know, the program that you aired, I'm sure, upset a lot of people. And I will never forget I forget whether it was the first series of specials you did or whether it was the second where you accumulated it with Lazar's story. You had mentioned that while an investigative reporter, you probed the mafia, you probed organized crime in Las Vegas, and you never encountered anything that generated the fear that you experienced as an investigative reporter dealing with covert aspects of our government. This was a heavy-duty statement for you to make.
Well, it was, and I didn't make it just in a cavalier manner. It really, when Bob went on the air, he had been on the air in May of 1989, but he was using a pseudonym. When
Dennis,
he went on the air
at the time,
said,
wasn't it?
Yes. When he said who he was, the phones rang off the hook. They basically didn't stop for a couple of weeks. With other people who had bits and pieces of information, no one at the time who claimed that the broad spectrum of information that Bob said he had, but other people with bits and pieces about the program out there. What's amazing is how many of these people, and I don't mean to sound like some exaggeration, paranoid type person, but how many of these people who called up and offered little bits and pieces of information were contacted subsequently by agents of different government agencies. In one case, it was a guy who said that he prepared tax returns for a lot of the people who worked at Area 51 and had obtained information that from them that, yes, there were alien craft that were stored and being tested out there. The day after he called me with that information, he gets a knock on the door from two guys who say they're from the Secret Service.
The Secret Service?
Yeah.
That's Department of Treasury.
Yeah.
What would they be doing there?
Well, he said that they were trying to lean on him about an older matter that he dealt with. I mean, he dealt with tax matters, but he said the message that he got, and I have this in writing, the message he got was very clear. It's to shut your mouth about what you learned about Area 51. There was a lady who I contacted through a law enforcement person that I know here in Las Vegas who had worked for a contractor at the Nevada test site, a company that's very much involved in very classified programs, national security programs, and she was a secretary who had sat in on a number of meetings involving her company and military officials. She took the notes. She said that she had a great deal of information that was relayed to her about flying saucers being recovered. She remembered Roswell being mentioned, and she remembered them saying that the technology was stored at Area 51. I had arranged to get this information from her in a face-to-face meeting through this third person who, as I said, was a law enforcement employee. After those arrangements were made on my phone at the office, this lady gets a visit from somebody from the company she worked for, and they told her, in essence, physical harm could come to she or members of her family if she talked about it, that she was still under a confidentiality oath. Basically what they said was, we know that you do a lot of traveling, we know your daughter does a lot of traveling, we'd hate to see anything happen.
Okay, my name is Don Ecker. The program is UFOs Tonight here on the Cable Radio Network. My guest this evening is veteran investigative journalist and television anchorman and host, former host of his own television talk show On the Record, Mr. George Knapp, the gentleman that broke the story on Bob Lazar and Area 51. If you're living in the 818-310 or 213 area, and we have a caller already, George. Yes, good evening.
Good evening, Don. How are you this evening?
I'm just fine.
I'm sure you recognize the voice, right?
Is this Video Dave?
Sure is. And Mr. Knapp, this is Dave Aaron of the UFO Audio Video Clearinghouse calling you in Yucaipa, California. How are you this evening?
Okay.
Was that a free plug, Dave?
No, I wanted to make sure. George was angry at me because I'm one of those people that originally distributed some of those UFOs, the best evidence, but I wanted to talk to Mr. Knapp in a little bit different vein if he can go along with what I want to kind of relate here in the conversation. Can you hear me okay, Mr. Knapp?
We'll give it a try. Go for it.
When you came out with that particular show, the information there was so overwhelming on UFOs, the best evidence, that it was true that we did duplicate a number of copies from that show that we got from one of our members in Nevada, in the Las Vegas area. And I hadn't known about the show, but the tape had come here. My question to you is, if something very tragic had happened, let's take the Holocaust back in World War II or something like that, and someone had gotten it, if there was video back in those days, and we could tell about the atrocities that were going on during World War II, do you think that that would have been in the same vein as getting that UFO information out via videotape across the world in 1988 or 89 when you did UFOs, the best evidence?
Well, I think you misunderstand me a little bit, Dave. The anger that was expressed to you was not from me personally, because personally I believe the more people that know about this topic, the better it is. KLAS-TV had never had this kind of response to any kind of programming or series that it had done before, and I think it was surprised to learn that people had dubbed this off and were selling copies of it. I just don't think they knew exactly what to make of it.
I know. I got 20 copies from foreign countries myself, George.
Well, personally, like I said, I'm called almost every day by people who say that they've got this copy and that copy from this source or whatever. I'm glad that people had a chance to see it. KLAS, there's no conspiracy involved in their failure to distribute this thing to a home market. It's just a series of circumstances, but I'm glad that you had copies of it. I'm glad that some of your subscribers got copies of it. In fact, Dave, you don't even know this, but my company now is a subscriber to your stuff.
Well, we have something very interesting for you then. I thought for sure you would be on because Don Ecker usually tells me a week in advance, so we can put it on our 900 number. I got a videotape today, and Don knows I send him copies of just about everything. I had a tape delivered today, Federal Express. This man was trapped in the woods in Canada. This was taken on Halloween night this year. And I watched this thing about 11 times today, and this was the most incredible tape I had ever seen. From 8 o'clock at night to 4 o'clock in the morning, this guy was hiding in the bushes videotaping UFOs.
No, wait a minute. This is a recent tape?
This is right off hot news right now as I'm talking to both of you.
And this just happened?
It happened October 13th, 1992. What is that, 2 weeks ago?
Oh, several weeks ago.
Halloween night, right.
And how much detail are you able to make out of this?
Well, what happened? I assume now, because I'm just taking a guess at this. But since George is, has so much more broadcasting contacts than I do, is that at 3 o'clock you see 3:30 a.m. on the camcorder, right? And you see him hiding in the bushes, and you see these objects flying over the top of him, and to the right and the left of him. Then the next thing, the camcorder comes on in the afternoon, early morning, say about 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And like in this scene, there's 11 discs going back and forth, back and forth. Then you see the police show up, and then it's dark again. So mainly I wanted not only Mr. Knapp and the listening audience out there to be aware of this tape, but I want to take this a step further, and that is, with so many millions of camcorders all over the world, so many people calling you every day, Don, so many people writing to Mr. Knapp or writing to KLAS, the only people that don't believe in UFOs are the officials.
Yeah, it would appear that way, Dave. Okay, well, look, we have got to move on.
Well, one more quick question. Wait, one quick question. George, people are always asking me what you're doing on the phone. What are you doing these days?
I work for a communications company. They have given me the green light within the past month to go ahead and pursue a whole series of UFO documentaries. We want to do it from kind of like soup to nuts, bring it to mom and pop America and later to the rest of the world in a way that hasn't been done before.
Well, we have the footage, and you can always either contact us through Don or through us direct, and we'll be more than happy to support you any way we can, George.
Thanks a lot, Dave.
Okay, bye now.
Okay, you guys take care, Dave.
Bye-bye.
Okay, George, we've got to take a quick break, and we will be right back.
CyberstationUSA.com. Stick around. We'll be right back.
If you're into the paranormal, then you're into Don Ecker and Dark Matters.
Something I have been immersed in for 20 years. Lunar research on items known as lunar transient phenomena. For over 400 years, world-class astronomers have been observing strange sights, lights, flashes, and other things on the moon.
Provocative topics, listeners' calls, and interesting guests.
My guest, Mr. Alan Stern.
On my website, I have a list of 100 or so lunar conspiracy theories. I had to kind of come to terms with one of them that I hadn't really thought about.
It's the kind of show that might keep you up at night.
Speculation is, at some time in our past, or perhaps even today, there is another presence on the moon. And I'm not talking about indigenous lunar folks. I'm talking about a space base by somebody else on the far side.
Dark Matters with Don Ecker, exclusively on CyberstationUSA.com.
I'm sure that there have been many people the last couple of years, because of the stories that you broke with this case, that have asked you, have you ever experienced any problems or threats or anything of a serious nature since you got involved in this situation? What's your answer?
No, and it really frosts me, because I think, Don, probably like you and Vicki, you'd like to think you're on the right track, and that knock at the door, where somebody says, hey, you're getting too close, would be a confirmation of the fact that you're on the right track.
Well, perhaps people in the media, though, are considered exempt from those forces because of the possibility of exposure.
Well, that's true, and that's why I think the way that if there is somebody listening in, and I think there was, at least for a while, the way that they chose to go was to contact the people who were contacting me.
Okay, we have a call for you right now on line number one. We have Bert from Burbank. Good evening, Bert.
Hello there, Don, and hi there, George. It's good to hear you on. I have a couple of questions, one for you, George, and then one for the both of you. George, kind of update us on what's the latest information that you've heard about Area 51.
Well, one of the latest things I've heard is they've changed the name. You know, it went from Watertown Strip to the Ranch to the Funny Farm to Dreamland to Area 51, and one of the things I've heard is they've changed the name because too many people know it. What they've changed it to, I don't know, but as soon as I find out, I'll let Don know and he can pass it on to you. Second thing is they put up some new signs out there. This information comes from Gary Schultz, who was up at the area 5 or 6 days ago with a television crew from Los Angeles. The signs that were always imposing before now say lethal force can be used against trespassers.
In other words, shoot on sight.
Yeah, which is, I'm not sure that they'd actually do that. I mean, they've got to get used to the idea that hundreds of people are roaming around up there, but it's a fairly intimidating statement on an official sign. There are still sightings. What they're seeing, I don't know. It's my feeling that if they ever had alien craft up there, and I believe they probably did, it makes very little sense to think that they would still have them up there with so many people going up with cameras and videotape equipment, etc., to look for them. What they're flying, there's a whole range of suggestions on that from people in the aviation industry, from the aviation writers. Something called the TR-3A or the Black Manta, something called the F-19, a stealth replacement for the F-15. Of course, the Aurora is mentioned frequently. A whole family of exotic propulsion vehicles. I seriously doubt that they still have what we're interested in up there.
Have they anybody been seeing or videotaping any of the craft that have been doing very unusual movements that are far beyond what our normal conception of aircraft would be?
Well, a couple of guys brought me some video last week. They'd climbed up the mountain to look down on the base, and I really don't know how to describe it on the radio without using gestures, but it was incredible movement. It almost looked like a strobe effect. This thing was on at one point and off, and then on at another point in the blink of an eye, just dancing around in almost a grid kind of a formation.
George, let me ask you a question. Are you aware of a road that is approximately an hour or so across the border from Nevada into California called Zizek Road?
Sure.
Okay. This is kind of an odd little thing that happened to myself and my partner, Richard Saraday, a few weeks ago. You're aware that I was down in Las Vegas to meet with a gentleman down there about some photographs?
Right.
Okay. On the way back, my partner had noticed that road and had asked me about it. He said, "That's really a strange name, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." And I was privy to a story that we're investigating at UFO Magazine with a gentleman who apparently underwent or allegedly underwent an abduction right there at that road and was missing for a day and a half. Okay? So coming back, Richard said, "Well, gee, let's stop there and just kind of take a look at the sky," because it was a beautiful evening. So we pulled off onto Zizek Road, and we were standing out there looking around, and I made a smart remark about, here we are, two guys at our age standing out in the middle of the desert, nowhere, looking for flying saucers. And we both started laughing about that when, honest to God, I noticed something in the sky. At first it looked just like a star. And the longer I looked at it, I noticed it was moving. And it was moving in a zigzag motion. It was doing a falling leaf. And I pointed this out to Richard, and we both started watching it because I wasn't sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. And we ended up watching that thing almost an hour and 15 minutes. And right before we left, we looked behind us, and I'll be darned if there wasn't another one behind us in the sky doing the same thing. Now, what in the world are these things? Do you think that they are, in fact, something from off-world, especially when we're talking about Las Vegas, the Nevada area, or could they be some type of new military technology?
Or maybe just something to mess with our collective heads. I mean, after all the attention devoted to that area, Area 51 is what I'm talking about, not Zizek, but I just can't imagine that they would still be flying it out there. I know that they have played some tricks on the nights when the saucer watchers are out there. They would put a balloon up with a flare hanging beneath it. I really don't think that the technology that we're interested in is still up there. What they're doing, I really don't know.
Well, you know, I have heard some rumors that it was being moved over to Lancaster in California.
Well, yeah, a lot of similar sightings. The same kind of craft.
Okay, Bert.
Don, let me ask you, I need your help on one quick thing here. I've been trying to track down some information on the supposed 2-minute conversation that was blanked out. I believe it was on the Apollo 11 moon landing where Aldrin and Armstrong were on the surface.
Right.
You're familiar with that?
Yes.
That
story was originally broken by Maurice Chatelain, who at one point had been a fairly high muckety-muck in NASA.
Now, I have seen supposed transcripts of it. I've also heard, which also makes sense, that ham radio operators, a number of ham radio operators across the world, had actually verified this. But it seems to me that some of the ham operators would have at least taped what was going on at the time, because I know hams who do that for space flights.
Right.
Have you ever heard of an actual existing tape?
No, I have not.
Have you ever had confirmed that this conversation actually occurred?
I'll tell you what I would do, Bert. Why don't you call me at the magazine and I can discuss it with you further?
I'd love to. Thanks, guys. George, keep up the good work. We really appreciate the information coming out from you.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
right,
thank you, Bert.
Bye.
And we have Don from North Hollywood. Good evening, Don.
Good evening, gentlemen. My quick question is, first off, I was introduced into the UFO phenomenon from a friend of mine. He gave me a video by Bill Cooper. Have either of you heard anything from this man, or know where he might be?
Well,
go ahead, George. You're the guest.
I think you can take that, Don. Yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about it. I'll talk about it in relation to Bob Lazar, because I think a lot of the problems that Bob has, credibility-wise, especially with the UFO hierarchy, is because he somehow in people's minds got mixed up with Bill Cooper. Bob knew John Lear. John Lear knew Bill Cooper. Bob met Bill Cooper a couple of times. Bill basically has now appropriated the Area 51 story for his own uses.
Not to mention the Kennedy assassination story that he purloined from Lars Hansen
Basically,
via John Lear.
It's the mother of all conspiracy theories, if you're not familiar with it. I mean, he incorporates UFOs, the Bilderbergers, the Trilaterals, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Jason Society. Everybody is in this plot.
Well, George, I have to take exception with that, because I have not yet heard Cooper mix in the Marilyn Monroe conspiracy.
Well, it's early. Anyway, a lot of people have mixed up Cooper with Lazar, and Lazar has come out on the short end of that because of the association. In my experience, Bill was on one of the first shows I did on the record on the UFO topic. He was on with John Lear. He came on. He seemed sincere. He seemed scared. He said that he hadn't done this before, going public with this information about what he said he had read in documents while he was in the Navy. He said he wasn't going to do it again. He was going to disappear because there had been threats on his life. Well, the first thing that happens is Bill Cooper gets an agent. He starts appearing all over the place. He's writing books. He's charging money for these lectures. And every time he puts out a paper of what he says he read, it incorporates more and more of other people's research.
Right. Incidentally, UFO Magazine, I did a 2-part story on Cooper. If you're interested, Don, in volumes 5, number 4, and volume 5, number 5, which basically showed that a lot of his information either was purloined, plagiarized, or in some cases, I suspect, totally made up.
Anyway, Cooper's out there. I don't mind saying it. I mean, I think that he's been associated with the latest the tripe is that a U.S. satellite is rigged with a...
Jack, do you have a copy of CIA Base?
No, I don't.
Well, I'll tell you what, that sure is something you ought to check out. And while we're at it here, we have some more telephone calls coming in. We have Richard from Santa Monica. Good evening, Richard.
Hey, partner, how you doing?
That Richard. Okay. Did you have a question for
Yes,
George.
I did. I had a question for George, and it was, I have heard that some producers in Hollywood are going to do a movie around Bob Lazar's story. Does he know anything about that? Can he tell us anything about it?
Well, I do. I think a lot of that is Bob's business, so I'm reluctant to kind of give you all the details. There has been some interest. I hope it comes off. I'm not sure that it's going to. Yeah, there's been some really strong interest in it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, that was my question. I was hoping to get more details, like if it was actually in production. That doesn't sound like it is.
No, it's not in production, no.
Okay. Well, enjoying the show.
Well, good question, Richard.
Okay, Don, I'll be listening.
Okay.
Bye.
You take care. George, how did you happen to come across Bob? I mean, this basically could be the coup of any newsman's life. And it's not often that, you come across a story with potentially universal implications. How did you happen to meet him?
Through John Lear. And Don, you described it perfectly. That's exactly how I thought about it the first time I heard Bob's story. I mean, here was a guy who is unprepossessing. He's not trying to make anybody, he's not trying to convince anyone. He told a simple story. And I'll tell you, the story that he told me the first time I met him is still the same story that he tells now. I know a lot of people have difficulties with bits and pieces of it. I do too. There are unanswered questions about Bob. But there were stories about Area 51 before Bob. There have been a lot of people come forward since Bob who have corroborated that information, and I basically feel pretty good about it.
Well, Lazar, I mean, let's face it, Lazar stated right at the beginning that he was not doing this for any reason other than to get himself publicly known so that he couldn't be harmed. Is that not the truth?
Well, that is absolutely true. I mean, a lot of people don't know the details of what was going on at that period of time, but it was a scary time. After he first did the Dennis interview, where he talked on KLAS-TV live without telling who he really was, things started happening in his life, and I was a witness to a lot of it. Break-ins to his house. He would come home at night. All the doors and windows are open, nothing taken. He'd go to a gym to work out. He'd come out. His car doors are open. He'd lock them. They're open, just sitting out open, nothing taken.
It sounds like what they did to Paul Benowitz.
I'm not as familiar with the Benowitz case, but yeah, it's similar. He'd get calls in the middle of the night, and it'd be one word, and they'd say, dead, on the other line, and then hang up. I remember going to Bob's house at that time period, and he would answer the door packing an Uzi. I mean, clearly there was something going on in his life, and he wasn't making this up.
You are basically convinced that at least the very crux of his story is the real thing.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we're talking about the United States of America, and according to the Constitution, we are all guaranteed certain rights. We are guaranteed the right of liberty, the right of happiness, etc., etc. Now, this had to be pretty darn disturbing to you as a news journalist.
Well, very disturbing. I mean,
Do you feel, George, number one, that this was a concerted, officially sanctioned at some quarter effort to intimidate him? And under that, do you feel that his life, in fact, was in danger? And number two, depending upon how you answer the first question, how do you feel the idea of taking this to a congressional or senatorial official would be met?
Regarding the first question, was there a concerted effort? There certainly was. What that effort consists of, I'm still not sure. I mean, I have no doubt that these people worked to wipe out his background. I have worked on this night and day for 3 years to try to track down a paper trail. It has been ridiculous, the kinds of barriers that have been thrown up. I even had Congressman Jim Bilbray here in Nevada try to help me out, and he wrote a letter to the effect that they've never seen a case like this. Routine questions were not answered in routine manner. Generally, these agencies, they would never say, we don't know Bob Lazar, we never heard of him. What they would say is, we're still looking. And now, 3 years later, they are still looking. Concerted effort to wipe out his background, yes. Was his life in danger? I don't know. I wonder now, looking back on it, whether or not Bob was almost like a test case, whether Las Vegas was almost a test market, the way McDonald's tests a new product in different markets. We've got flying saucers up here, alien technology. Let's put out the story in a way that we can always retract and see if people freak out and run around in panic in the streets. Well, Las Vegas didn't panic, but I think they did a pretty good job on Bob Lazar.
Okay, now that brings up another interesting point, George. As you know, I know Bob. I've been down to Las Vegas. I've talked to Bob. I've talked to Gene. As a matter of fact, Gene was even up here at one point this past year. And one thing that has always intrigued me is the fact that Bob has had an almost laissez-faire attitude about it all. Now, there are a lot of people out there that really wanted to jump on this bandwagon when this thing first broke and said, look, this is the first time that it looks like a real insider is out here with the information. And there would have literally been tens of thousands of people that would have stood with him. But yet, when the questions started to arise about Bob's background and so forth, he had an absolutely, he had no interest in seeming to substantiate what he was saying. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have many thoughts. Since I've been the guy who's been trying to prod him into telling the whole story, I mean, there's a lot of information about his experiences and this investigation that has never come out. I hope someday it will come out. It is infuriating. It drives you up the wall that he won't cooperate. I mean, he is lackadaisical. He is incredibly sloppy when it comes to records. I mean, there are big chunks of his life that he's talked about that we cannot verify yet. I have worked on this like you wouldn't believe, and getting Bob to cooperate sometimes is very, very difficult. That aside, I still believe there is a great deal of circumstantial evidence, a great deal of supporting testimony from other people who don't even know the guy, that he's telling the truth. Whether he was set up, that's another question. Whether he was part of a disinformation campaign, whether he was hypnotized, drugged, induced to do this through pain or whatever. I mean, he will acknowledge that he had things done to his head. I don't know. Any of those possibilities as a newsman is intriguing to me.
Okay, that brings up some other interesting points, but we've got to take a break, so just stick there for a second, George. We'll be right back.
Every day is
This is
the future of radio in America.
The future of radio.
This is the future of radio.
The future of radio.
Rather extraordinary things. Cyber Station USA.
100% on point, ready to execute.
To remake the world.
Broadcasting to the universe.
This is cyberstationusa.com.
Revolutionizing radio.
This may be one of the greatest moments in history.
And we are back with George. George, not only has Bob been somewhat reticent about disclosing details in his background, but even things that have come into question, for example, of what type of university degrees does he have. Now, he originally stated, or at least someone stated, that he had been to MIT, among other universities, yet when a check is made, nobody can find Bob's name. Has he ever mentioned to you, the professors, or any of his classmates that he attended school with there, something that in fact would verify this? And doesn't he have any degrees from his school days? I know I do. I would presume you do. And anybody that has attended college or even high school keep their degrees.
You know what, Don? I don't have my degrees. I lost them. And Bob's answer to how that happened is a very personal one, but I'll share it with you. His wife died when he worked at Los Alamos Lab, and
right.
He says that he left basically everything, not only degrees and papers and photos and other things, but along with $50,000 worth of photographic processing equipment, he just left. This is the most bothersome part of the story, and I've talked to Bob many times. I think we're friends. I have offered him the opportunity to tell me, Bob, did you exaggerate about your educational background? Because a lot of people do that. You know that in every walk of life, in every occupation, they would exaggerate something on a resume, and he's always stuck to it. As for professors, he gave me the name of one at MIT. I checked on that the professor is not there now. Whether he was there then, when Bob says he went there, MIT would not give me that information. I do have one person who says he went to school with Bob, or at least was aware that Bob was going to classes at Caltech. His name is Jim Tagliani. He was a technician in the stealth fighter program here in Tonopah, Nevada. He worked with Bob in the early 1980s at a place called Fairchild Zincom Systems in Simi Valley. I have some documentation to back that part of it up, and he said he remembers Bob as working a lot of weird shifts to accommodate his classes there. I agree with you that is a bothersome part of it. For me and for KLAS-TV, though, and I hope this is not too roundabout a way to answer this question, the key to the story of Lazar has always been Los Alamos. If he worked at Los Alamos, it suggests it's at least possible that he could have been hired away to work in a classified program such as at S4 or Groom Lake. If he worked at Los Alamos and was hired there, then he had to have gone to school somewhere. The only record we can have for Bob Lazar ever in college is a single class in electronics at a junior college in California.
Right.
And you don't get hired at Los Alamos with that kind of an educational background. You especially don't get hired at Los Alamos with that kind of an educational background if you're recruited by a headhunter company such as Kirkmeyer, which is the case in Bob's instance. So for us, the key was always Los Alamos.
Well, something, George, that a lot of people forget since your superb program first aired is what background and research and things that you did in order to substantiate the Lazar story. Now, I'm speaking specifically about the regression that Lazar went through, the polygraph examinations that he took, and I believe he passed all of them, if I'm not incorrect. And you had also off the record, because I've talked to you about this before, you've had other people verify much of what Lazar stated that would not go on the record because of fears of personal safety. Is that not correct?
That is absolutely correct. One of those persons that I'm working with now, and I'm sorry to be unnecessarily mysterious with your audience, one of those persons is a person whose background is unquestioned. His credentials are unquestioned. There is absolutely no doubt that he was in a position to know about things that went on at Area 51. Whether or not he will ever concede to go public with this information is another matter. He's given it to me. He just hasn't given me the authorization to release that information.
Well,
I am certain in the big picture that what Lazar is saying is true.
Well, you've talked to many people during the course of the last 4 or 5 years about this subject, and one in particular that keeps sticking in my mind is the Air Force radar technician that you spoke to, who, of course, is remaining nameless because of the fact that he's in the service, but he tracked objects in excess of 7,000 miles an hour, according to your report, and then making right-angle turns. I mean, come on now. We don't have anything that I'm aware of, or even on the drawing boards, that can display those type of characteristics, do we?
Not that I know of. Here's something else we don't have, Don. In 1989, the Department of Defense put out this, it's a request for bids, basically, from small business people to deal with specific projects that DOD needed. What it requested was a communications and telemetry system that could keep up with something that travels at Mach 25. What do we have that goes Mach 25? I don't know. But the description in this DOD document says basically that these craft have been developed, hypersonic craft, that not only leave test ranges behind, but also nations. And it requested that the system, whoever would develop it, would be operational by 1995.
That's amazing. Well, look, each week this time we have the UFO news update and commentary by Vicki Cooper, George. So if you can hang on just a moment, and as soon as it's over, we'll be right back with more. And incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, if you live in the 818-213 or 310 area,
Hello, this is Vicki Cooper with the UFO News Update and Comment for Sunday, November 15, 1992. The latest case to stir the UFO pot has researchers questioning the methods of Bud Hopkins, who has been considered the foremost authority in the field of alien abduction. Hopkins, an artist and author, is overseeing the case of Linda Napolitano, an Italian-American housewife from New York who claims that in 1989 aliens floated her out of her 12th-story apartment window in full view of 3 witnesses. The complicated case has been marred by charges and countercharges about the veracity of Napolitano, and now Hopkins himself is under fire for holding back crucial material that would, he says, prove that she was kidnapped by aliens who wanted to be observed doing their dirty deed. 2 of those witnesses are purported government agents, known only as Richard and Dan, who have provided Hopkins with over 80 letters, plus drawings and audio tapes in support of the Linda case. Skeptics say they found various holes in Napolitano's story, pointing out the lack of available evidence. For his part, Hopkins insists that there's no possibility of the case being a hoax, that the reams of purported evidence, which only he is privy to, confirm Linda's abduction story. It's true that UFO cases, as a rule, always lack good evidence, but that doesn't excuse Hopkins from withholding crucial details about a case he's giving wide visibility, or for parceling out information only to those researchers whom he deems trustworthy. The irony is that Hopkins puts more confidence into a couple of obviously shady characters whom no one has been able to meet directly than in those researchers who have reasonable questions about the case. For all we know, Richard and Dan are nothing more than players in a mind control game, and the Linda case is just another intelligence agency ruse out to make us all believe in little gray aliens. This UFO news update and comment has been brought to you by UFO Magazine and the UFO Media Group. We can be reached at P.O. Box 1053 or call 8180. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. This is Vicki Cooper for the UFO Media Group and UFOs Tonight on the Cable Radio Network.
And we are back. George, I hadn't heard that news commentary before just a moment ago. And, Vicki had some interesting observations there about manipulation of information and disinformation. Have you encountered anything that you can obviously put your finger on in the realm of UFO information that was obviously disinformation?
Yeah, I have, Don, but I'm not sure that we have enough time for me to explain this case. It's been a really weird series of experiences I've had after going on the air with a Lazar story, receiving a whole host of unsolicited information about a particular individual here in town who was supposedly involved with this, with the UFO and alien research program.
Well, then obviously we're going to have you come back, George.
Well, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff here I haven't got around to.
Well, tell me now, Las Vegas also has had a number of other associated phenomena with the UFO thing. You folks experienced some rather mysterious animal mutilations down there several years ago, haven't you?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, during the course of your investigative research into this, and of course this is a question that always crops up, do you believe that these mutilations are somehow connected with the UFO phenomenon? And if so, George, do you have any idea of what it may be?
I think that question's beyond me. I mean, I think that there is a connection. Too many people have seen the strange lights. Too many people have reported the mutilation phenomenon here in Nevada, in areas around Area 51, in the counties around Area 51. No tracks, no blood, surgical precision. Obviously, nobody took a laser machine out into these pastures. No one sees anything at all other than an occasional light here and there. Yeah, I think they're related. Whether they're related to Area 51 is another matter, because mutilations are reported all over the country in areas that don't have bases such as this. What the bottom line is, why they would be mutilating cattle, I don't know. I know Whitley Strieber had an interesting comment about it when I asked him. He said, certainly the aliens aren't doing anything worse to cattle than we're doing. If you've ever been inside of a slaughterhouse, you know that. I know that the area around the Groom Lake base has not only seen a great number of cattle mutilations, but this past weekend, actually last weekend, I had an opportunity to spend some time with a family up there that's basically been terrorized by something. They report seeing a number of what we would call flying saucers, flying discs, alien craft, strange blinking lights flying all over their house. They live just adjacent to the Nellis test range. They even report seeing these vehicles, whatever they are, being chased by U.S. Air Force jets. They've been through a terrible time, which hopefully your audience will learn more about in the future. A lot of strange activity here in Nevada. A lot of it seems to fit the pattern that we've heard reported all around the country. If you're looking for the big answer, I don't know. I do want to go back to one question you asked earlier, Don, about congressional interest. I don't think that any kind of congressional formal hearing is going to happen again. I think that the stakes are too high for politicians these days to come clean to say that they're interested in this phenomenon. But I will tell you this, that a great number of high-ranking persons on Capitol Hill are interested in this phenomenon, and I know that from personal first-hand experience because I've talked to them myself.
Well, you know, George, in my opinion, and I've been involved in this research for, it seems like forever now, but for at least 5 years, I think you're absolutely correct. The stakes are tremendously high, much higher than anybody realizes. And you're right once again. I don't believe that there ever again will be a congressional inquiry. It's not a question of if they're real, but it's a question of, yes, they are real. What do they want? And we have time for just one last call. We have KV from Palmdale on Jones Cable. Good evening.
Hello.
Did you have a question for my guest, Mr. George Knapp?
I'm really interested in this because I was in the service for 6 years, and I was with the part of the service, ADA,
with what?
Which is Air Defense Artillery, and I worked with Nike Herc and Hawk missiles. I was a radar technician, and I've seen about 40. I've tried to track them. I tried locking onto them. As soon as you try and lock onto them, they take off.
Where was this at, KV?
Over in Europe.
Were you in Germany?
I was in the Eifel region, yeah.
Did you report this to
I tried reporting it, and they told me if I did, I had to rewrite my reports every time.
To say
I was told
what?
if I did, they'd lock me up.
To say what?
They'd lock me up.
You
they'd
were
lock
told
me up
they'd
in the
lock
nut
you up?
house. They said it was a malfunction in the radar, and I'd go out and check the radar and everything, and everything was cool. You know, everything was to specs. Matter of fact, we had one of the best units in our detachment.
How many years ago was this now that you were over there?
Okay, I had sightings in 73, 76, and 77. It wasn't real recent, you know, but I have seen them, and then I've seen them physically. I went outside when I did spot them when they came right over the top, you know, because I kept trying to lock onto them, and they were in a group of 3, and they came right over the top of where I was, and they separated, they took off, and I mean, so fast it was unreal. And like you mentioned earlier, they did, you know, right-angle turns at phenomenal speeds. I mean, our speed scales for the tracking device.
KV, why don't you, we're just about out of time here. We're a little less than a minute, but why don't you give me a call at UFO Magazine, because I'd really like to talk about this with you some more.
Sure.
Okay, do you have our number?
I just had this number, this 1-800 number.
Yeah. Number. UFO Magazine is, do you got a pencil?
Yes.
It's 81. Thank you very much. We're going to have to go now. Okay, George, we're just about out of time. We've got about 40 seconds, and in that time, give me your quick, dirty readout on the UFO field.
Oh, well, back to the congressional matter. Like I said, I don't think it's going to happen again in a public setting, but I think your readers should know that there is very sincere interest at very high levels on Capitol Hill in getting to the bottom of this. I don't think that the interest is necessarily in the cosmic questions, why are they here, where are they from, what do they want kind of things, as opposed to interest in very earthly matters such as the people who are running this, how are they getting away with it, and how are they paying for it. That's encouraging to me.
Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed this edition of Don Ecker Live.
Well, George, that was Larry King telling us that we're out of time.
Well, he's got a lot of nerve.
Great. We're going to have you back very soon. Thank you very much, and hang on the line for just a moment.
Okay.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's it for another week of
Okay, if you've noticed that the show appeared to be out of time, actually it was, because back in that time period, UFOs Tonight was still only 1 hour long. However, that was such an outstanding and stellar broadcast that I got a hold of George. I asked him if he would come back the following week and basically have a redo, and he agreed.